Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 163. And just a little catch up before we get into that. Over the last couple story arcs, Swamp Thing has been guided by three mysterious men who are named El Senior Blake, Don Roberto, and the Mysterious Traveler. And they want him to complete the trials of the different elemental parliaments. So as of now, Swamp Thing has completed two of them, which has given him the elemental dominion over the earth, minerals, and plants, and also over water. And in the last issue, we got to see Swamp Thing use his new water abilities to defeat the wizard named Broakin, who was sent to Earth to prepare it for the coming of the evil warlocks from a place called Mira. Now, Broakin was unsuccessful because he did not know about Swamp Thing's new powers over water and stone, so he was defeated because of that. Now, in the meantime, a man named Jim Rook, who had previously defeated the evil warlocks, has gone to Mira once again and ignited the flaming sword of the night and has become known as the hero named Nightmaster. Now, he went back to Mira through a dimensional gateway that is inside of a bookstore named Oblivion Inc. And that is where we left off. So first things first, with issue 163, we got the cover. We see the same black and white style that has been on the last couple covers, and Swamp Thing is walking through the swamp with lots of trees surrounding him, and these trees have faces, and some have trunks and branches that are in the shape of human torsos and human arms. And we also see that this issue was written by Mark Miller, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMulder. And as we turn to the first page, we start off in a bar in Manhattan with one of the three mysterious men that has been guiding Swamp Thing, who is named El Senior Blake, and he is sitting at an empty table, and the rest of the bar is also completely empty, and Blake is checking an extremely old-looking pocket watch, like he's waiting for someone, and he says, "Late again." Then we turn the page, and we cut to a boy named Jules Latremier in Louisiana, and I believe we've seen this boy before in this run. He is the Cajun boy whose father turned into a tree in the swamps after Swamp Thing murdered all the Cajun people in the village. So last time we saw him, he was bringing food to his tree father, and he seems to be getting ready to do that now, because in the panels on this page, we see him getting some freshly caught fish from his kitchen as his mom cooks dinner, and then he's taking them through the swamp, and over these panels, the narration says, "The smell of boiling crawfish drifts through the north tip of the swamplands, as those people lucky enough to be alive prepare a tasty Cajun supper. Their new camp is small and Spartan, but far enough from the monster to get a good night's sleep. Those who died, however, have not been forgotten. Every night, without exception, the Cajun children bring them something fresh to eat. To say these creatures were dead is an exaggeration, but to describe them as alive would be quite wrong. Those with mouths still eat and talk, but it's clear these people trees are no longer human. Young Jules is their most regular visitor, enjoying nothing more than the company of his late papa. The others have grown fond of him too, and wonder what's keeping him. He's promised to bring a recent newspaper tonight." "Maybe he's in trouble," someone grumbles. "Perhaps the swamp monsters found him right now, and he's fighting for his short little life." And right then, the young boy Jules comes upon Swamp Thing, but it looks like Swamp Thing's trying to hide or something, because he is behind a tree, and the tree looks like it's leaning over him, almost oppressively. And Swamp Thing is looking up at it like he's concerned or possibly scared. And also on this issue, we see that the name of it is Trees of Knowledge. So as Jules sees Swamp Thing, he cautiously walks up to him, and then Swamp Thing notices the boy, and Jules says to him, "Why are you crying? Did somebody get away?" And Swamp Thing seems confused by this question, so he asks, "What?" And Jules replies, "You know, did somebody fire a silver bullet at you or something? And manage to get away before you rip them apart? Is that why you're crying, Bon Gumbo?" Then Swamp Thing kneels down in front of Jules and says to the boy, "I am depressed because I am alone. Someone I care about very much asked if she could come live with me again, but I said no. This upset her a great deal. Sometimes I wish I'd agreed. I'd have liked her to stay a little while." And Jules asks, "You mean so you could eat her?" And Swamp Thing looks kind of taken aback by this question, but it's kind of fair because Swamp Thing did murder Jules' dad and a bunch of Cajuns, so Swamp Thing just stands up and says, "No. Rest assured, I had no plans to eat her." Then we see Swamp Thing is holding something between his thumb and forefinger on his left hand, and the boy notices it and he says, "What's that you're holding in your hand? Is it a button? I've never seen you wear a shirt before." And Swamp Thing replies, "It does not belong to me. This is a button from Abby's blouse, but even this has become nothing more than a reminder of all that I have lost. I have kept it safely all these years as a trophy of our love, and the loss that I know is yet to come." And Jules says, "I think it's good to keep things. I keep my papa's teeth right here so I never forget them." And then Jules reaches into his shirt pocket and he pulls out a dipping tobacco tin. And as he opens it to show Swamp Thing his dad's teeth, he says, "I pulled them out myself when he died, see?" And as Swamp Thing looks at the teeth, he then looks at the boy and he says, "You're the little Cajun boy who comes down to feed the people trees, aren't you? I've heard you singing songs to cheer them up. Do you live upriver in the new camp?" And Jules replies, "Yeah, we built it when you destroyed the old one." And then he holds out his hand to Swamp Thing to shake it, and he says, "My name's Jules, Julien La Tremouille. Pleased to meet you." And as Swamp Thing shakes it, he says, "My name is Alec Holland." And Jules asks, "Should I call you Alec?" And with a big smile on his face, Swamp Thing says, "Yes, I would like that very much." And then they begin to walk side by side in the swamp, and Jules says to him, "It's funny, I used to be afraid of you, but I've been watching the things you do around the swamp. You seem so nice. I don't understand. I can't figure out why you wrecked our village." And then Swamp Thing stops walking, and he looks down at the boy with a sad look on his face, and he says, "The terrible event you describe was beyond my control. A higher authority controlled a powerful aspect of my being. You have my word. I would rather take my own life than allow such a tragedy to happen again." And then Jules takes Swamp Thing's hand and he begins to pull him so he'll move forward. And he says, "Why don't you come and talk to them? Tell them what you told me, and maybe they'll realize you don't mean them any harm." And as Swamp Thing hesitates, he says, "Do you think that's a good idea?" And as Jules pulls his arm more with a big smile on his face, he says, "Of course I do. You're not a bad man, Alec. Gene LeBeaustri used to tell us you were the good spirit who watched over the swamps, and he was right. Until you killed him, that is." And this last line that Jules says is actually being said on a TV that Don Roberto is watching in Peru. So he's watching in on what Swamp Thing's doing right now. Then Don Roberto switches the TV channel, and we see the face of El Senior Blake come on the TV and say, "I guess you're right, honey pie. Them little eggs in your sweet belly are still 100% unfertilized. Must be my mistake." Then Don Roberto clicks the channel again, and we see the third mysterious traveler, who we just call the mysterious traveler, who's the older man with a staff, and he's on the TV now saying, "Perhaps you misunderstood. A doorway is opening from the shadow realm, and our darkest fantasies are lining up to come through." Then he changes the channel again, and this time we get two people we don't know. We see an older man and a younger woman, and the older man is saying to the woman, "I might be a bald accountant, but I make 250 grand base salary, and rooks on Social Security. What's the big attraction?" Then we get a panel of Don Roberto just staring at the TV from his couch, and the narration over this says, "Don Roberto has been channel surfing the unknown frequencies for an hour and a half, eager to see how things are developing in Mira. When he last tuned in, the traveler was losing the good fight against the warlocks, and it looked like all hope was lost. The old man sent 2 messengers to Earth to bring back the Nightmaster. Now Don Roberto wants to know what happened next." Then we see Don Roberto click again, And as we turn the page, we see the screen has gone blank, and the narration continues saying, "The unknown frequency as we see it." So I guess it looks blank to us, but to Don Roberto, it must look like something, because there's a panel of his face staring at the TV and he looks very worried. And then he stands up and walks towards the TV, and the narration continues saying, "The images are impossible to describe, hypnotic in their obscenity, half-eaten corpses stretching out forever, children violated by shrieking warlocks. Even the traveler has fled. All that's left is the Nightmaster, retreating further and further as the warlocks advance their hordes towards the earth. Now the Swamp Thing is the only one who can stop them before they reach us." Then Don Roberto clicks the TV off, and then he goes over to an altar with a bunch of candles on it, and the narration says, "Everything is going exactly as planned." Then we cut back to Swamp Thing, and specifically the area where all the tree people are, and we see one of them is looking down on Swamp Thing, and he's saying to Jules, "This is obscene, Jules. You shouldn't have brought this creature here under any circumstances. He just wants to piss on our graves." Then Swamp Thing looks up at him and says, "I told you this was a mistake." And Jules cuts in, "Why won't you listen to him? Alec doesn't mean any harm. I asked him to come here and explain why he hurt everybody, Papa. Please let him speak." And his tree father responds, "We're not interested in his lies, Jules. He might have fooled you, but we're in tune with the wood now. We know he attacked us because an elemental force separated him from his humanity." And Swamp Thing's kind of taken aback by this, and he asks, "You do? Then you must understand that I am not truly responsible for your situation. The Parliament of Trees is the guilty party." And the tree replies, "More lies, more bullshit. All they did was free you from your humanity and let you do what you always wanted to do, Bun Gumbo. They let you taste blood without guilt, and now you're hungry for more. This erosion of your humanity began on the day you first rose from the swamps, when you lost your life and all its rich rewards in a ball of fire. Your only hope then was that one day you might find a way to be human again, but even this was dashed in a basement laboratory beneath a Washington skyscraper. In time, you accepted your fate. You fell in love and fathered a child, but these gifts were only given to you in the knowledge that one day they would be taken away. The disappointments were intended to make you more remote, a little less human every day. Some time ago, a cheat magician gave you a glimpse of your potential, but the old souls who guide you now have a dark agenda of their own. These three have been around since the earth was new, and they know this world is doomed if man remains the dominant species. They want you to give them a chance to wipe the slate and start all over again." And this tree person is actually narrating as we get some panels of these events that he was talking about. So in one of the panels, we see Swamp Thing rising from the swamp the day he was, I guess you'd call it, born. And then we see the laboratory where Swamp Thing was frozen by the Sunderland Corporation. And this is from the first Alan Moore Swamp Thing issue called Anatomy Lesson. And this is where he found out that he was not human. He was actually a plant that thought he was human. And then we get a panel of Swamp Thing hugging Tefe and Abby looking on with a smile on her face. And then there's a panel of the three mysterious men, Don Roberto, L. Blake, and the mysterious traveler. And also John Constantine is standing next to them. So these panels are just there to illustrate what has happened to Swamp Thing in the past and give maybe new readers a glimpse of some things they didn't know about. So now this tree person is giving us some knowledge about maybe what these three mysterious travelers are up to. And Swamp Thing isn't really believing this theory that this tree person has. And he says, "Impossible. These entities have been guiding me to greatness so that I might protect the world. And the tree person says, protect us from who? Murderers? Bank robbers? They're chipping away at your humanity until you see the world through an uncaring God's eyes. Mankind is the virus they want you to eliminate. A new species is already being prepared to take our place. And then Jules, who's kind of very alarmed about all this because he thought everybody was going to be, forgiving and happy at this meeting, he asked Swamp Thing, Alec, is any of this stuff true? And Swamp Thing replies, of course not. They're lying. They're all insane. And then he tries to stomp off out of the grove where all these tree people are, but one of them calls to him and says, you know the truth, Bon Gumbo. We can hear the echoes of your terrible thoughts through the green. As you descend through the parliaments of this world, your fantasies grow darker and louder, while your elemental abilities grow greater. This is why you cry such bitter tears, Bon Gumbo. For whether you admit it to yourself or not, we know you're looking forward to the destruction to come. Then we turn the page and we cut to the bar in Manhattan where L. Senior Blake is sitting at the empty table. But the bar is not empty anymore. We see a woman is sitting at the bar now, and as she's trying to get a drink but she doesn't see a bartender, she says, Jesus, would it be too much to expect a little service around this place? Supposing I was a thief or something, I could have helped myself to the cash register and be halfway to Rio de Janeiro by now. Then L. Senior Blake says to her from his table, Rio's 4,000 miles south of this barroom, honey pie. 60 minutes traveling time, even by modern supersonic plane. You only been sitting there 2 minutes. Then the woman, who I guess is startled because she didn't see him sitting there, says, Shit, where the hell did you come from? And Blake replies, Oh, I came from someplace don't even exist no more, Maggie. I'm just sitting around here killing time, waiting for an old friend who's always late. And a somewhat confused Maggie says, Would you like to explain to me how you know my name? Have you and me met somewhere before? And Senior Blake lights a cigarette and answers, My friends call me El Senior Blake. Most people met me once or twice in their lifetimes. I know all kinds of magic shit, Maggie. Like the fact you're pregnant, and one day, pretty soon, you're gonna give birth to one special little boy. Then Maggie walks up to his table and leans on it and says, What are you talking about? I'm not gonna have a baby. I hate kids. I never have one of my own. Then Blake points at her and says, Well, could be old Blake's got his facts wrong again. Just 1 minute and we'll see. And then Senior Blake, I guess, gets some fancy sunglasses out, and they must be like magical or something, because he puts them on, and as he looks at Maggie, her torso says the words, No baby yet. And he looks kind of confused by this, and he says, I guess you're right, honey pie. Them little eggs in your sweet belly are still 100% unfertilized. Must be my mistake. And if you remember, this scene is what we saw in one of Don Roberto's channels as he was flipping through them. So Don Roberto pulls out a chair at his table and he points to it and he says, Why don't you sit down? Take some weight off your feet and keep me company till my good friend arrives. Drinks are on me and almost no strings attached. And as Maggie stares at the chair, she says, I only came here to see if I could find some guy who promised me a washing machine. Maybe I should try his apartment. And then Senior Blake very nonchalantly pulls out his pocket watch, and as he looks at it, he says, Suit yourself, Maggie, honey pie. My good friend should be joining me soon anyway. Right now, he's busy talking to the trees. Then we cut back to Swamp Thing and Jules in the swamp, and they have walked away from the people tree groves, and Jules is saying to Swamp Thing, Well, I reckon I should probably be heading home now. It's getting late, and my Aunt Jamie will be wondering where I am. And Swamp Thing says to him, Jules, those things your father said, you know I'd never allow them to happen. And Jules replies, Yeah, at least I think I understand. And Swamp Thing says, These 3 men who have been showing me the full extent of my abilities, I can ignore them, you know. The future doesn't have to be as bleak as your father paints it. If my evolution endangers humanity, then it must end here. Please believe me when I say I don't really want to hurt anyone." And Jules reaches up and shakes Swamp Thing's hand, and he says, "Well, that's good enough for me. It was nice meeting you, Alec. You really aren't scary at all close up." And then Jules takes off running back to his aunt's house, and as he does, Swamp Thing calls to him, "Goodbye, Jules. It was nice to meet you too." Then we see Swamp Thing get very cautious, like he just heard something or maybe sensed something in the air. And as he turns around to look behind him, we see the mysterious traveler is standing there in the swamp, and Swamp Thing says to him, What are you doing here?" And the traveler replies, "The trials aren't over yet, Holland Mind. We've been watching you carefully from the shadows, and you've done well to come so far. Now you must play your part in the ordeal constructed by the Parliament of Vapors. The stage is Manhattan, and there's little time. Come quickly, and we might still stand a chance." And Swamp Thing answers, "No, I'm not going anywhere with you. Enough is enough." And the traveler replies, "Perhaps you misunderstand. A doorway is opening from the Shadow Realm, and our darkest fantasies are lining up to come through. Use the abilities you've been taught, Holland Mind. Defeat the warlocks of Mira, and greater knowledge will be your reward." And Swamp Thing says, "I don't care. I'm tired of these new powers. I've never been so miserable in my life." And the traveler cuts in saying, "Did I ever promise you happiness? All I offered you was a chance to be greater than God himself." And Swamp Thing replies, "This is sick. Don't you understand? It's blasphemy. The Cajun people suffering in the Death Garden. They told me what you're planning to do. You're chipping away at my humanity until all that's left is a monster who wants to wipe mankind from the face of the earth." And as Swamp Thing says this, he falls to his knees and puts his head in his hands, and the traveler walks over and stands above him and says, "Do you believe them?" And Swamp Thing replies, "My brain tells me they've taken leave of their senses, driven mad by their circumstances. But my heart, dear God, my heart knows they're telling the truth." And then the traveler grabs Swamp Thing's right arm, and he pulls the hand up, and he says, "The truth doesn't matter. The abilities you've been shown were granted you so that you might defeat the warlocks. Use them now, just as you destroyed the druid, or this world will meet the same fate as their own." And Swamp Thing says, "There are others to deal with these problems. Superhumans watching over the world." And the traveler replies, "Those fools won't be allowed to intervene. You're the one we hoped would save everyone and pass through the final ritual in the process." And then Swamp Thing stands up and he begins to walk away from the traveler through the swampy water, and he says, "I don't care about anything anymore. All I want is Abby back in my arms and things to be just as they were." And the traveler asks, "And that is your final decision?" And Swamp Thing answers, "Yes, this is my final decision." And then the traveler walks up behind Swamp Thing and he says, "Then your worry that my colleagues and I are guiding you away from your humanity is unfounded. I suspect your humanity has already disappeared." And then as quick as he came, the traveler disappears. Then we cut back to El Senor Blake in the bar, and he's once again sitting alone at the table. And as he takes a drink out of his cup, all of a sudden the traveler appears in front of him. And the traveler says to Blake, "He's not coming, Blake. We're in trouble. Big trouble." And Blake looks at him not impressed and says, "You're kidding me, right? No way Holland Mind's gonna say no to us." And the traveler replies, "I'm afraid the situation has become more complex. The cable woman visited him and said something which seems to have thrown all our plans into disarray." And Blake replies, "White-haired witch. Should have killed her like I said. And as the traveler's raven flies into the room and lands on his shoulder, the traveler says, It's too late for regrets now, Blake. The human template the monster was forged from is fighting the evolution we prepared for him. Now he believes he can save humanity by refusing to fight the warlocks for us. He won't accept the trial of the Parliament of Vapors. We'll have to find someone else who will. And then Blake puts his head in his hands and he says, Me and Don Roberto already made sure none of them super folks got involved in this stuff. Big mistake, huh? Now we got nobody to protect us. And the traveler says, No one except the Nightmaster. And then Blake looks up at the traveler like he's an idiot and he says, Jesus, man. Jim Rook was just used to build up the excitement. You can't expect him to win the trial set by the Parliament of Vapors. And the traveler sits down at the table and says, The Nightmaster beat the warlocks once. He could do it again, Blake. Stranger things have happened. Raising the Holland mind to godhood is no longer our main priority. Survival is what this is all about now. You would do well to remember that. Did you bring the doll I requested? And at that, Senior Blake pulls out the doll of a woman, and it's about the size of a Barbie, maybe a little bit larger. And as he looks at it, Blake says, Don't worry about the doll. I got it here. And the traveler replies, Good. Jim Rook needs an incentive to fight, and we've promised him his ex-wife as a prize. Pull the cord, make her love him again. And then Roberto flips the doll over and sees there is a little pull cord on her back, and he says, Like this? As he fingers the pull ring on her back, and the traveler says, Just pull the cord, Blake. And as he does, the doll says, I'm leaving you, Maurice. I'm going back to Manhattan to have sex 5 times a night with my gorgeous husband. Then we turn the page, and we cut to the real-life adult analog of this doll, who looks to be Jim Rook's ex-wife. And we see her storming out of her house very angrily, and a man is running after her in a bathrobe saying, What did you just say? And she replies, I said I'm leaving you, Maurice. I'm going back to Manhattan to have sex 5 times a night with my gorgeous ex-husband. Jesus, do I have to say everything twice? And her husband, who just stops dead at this at the landing, says, This is insane. You hate Jim Rook's guts. Is this some kind of attention thing, Janet? Is it about the stuff I didn't want to do in bed the other night? And as she gets into her car, Maurice rushes up to her passenger window, and Janet says, I don't know what's making me do this, Maurice, but it's too powerful to resist. Please, just step back from the car. And then she slams on the gas pedal and drives away, and as Maurice watches the car go down the driveway, he yells, Janet! Then we see another purse come out of the house and stand next to Maurice, and this is a younger man who kind of looks like a grunge kid, and he's got a bunch of piercings on his ears, and he says, Hey, what's going on, Dad? Did you and Mom have some kind of major argument here tonight? And Maurice answers, Your mother and I never argue, Patrick. We have debates, and tonight she proposed that she might go back to Manhattan to live with Jim Rook. None of this makes any sense. I might be a bald accountant, but I make $250,000 base salary, and Jim Rook's on Social Security. What's the big attraction? And I believe we saw this exact scene on Don Roberto's TV earlier this issue as he was flipping through the channels as well. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Manhattan, where we see Jim Rook standing in front of the Oblivion Ink store, and a bunch of other people dressed like superheroes are running away from the doorway. But Jim Rook is standing there like he's about to defend it with his sword, and he yells, Bastards! So much for Stalker the Soulless, or whatever the hell you call yourself. Come back and help us, you chicken shit yellow bastards. You can't expect me to fight all the warlocks by myself. And as he says this, Boz comes through the door, and he says, Run, Nightmaster! They're right behind me! And then he trips and falls to the ground in front of Jim Rook. And as Jim looks down at him, he moves over to some trash in the alley next to Oblivion Ink and begins moving some of it aside to reveal a couple of wooden crates. And he says to Boz, On your feet, big guy. We'd better block the shop's doorway before the warlocks catch up with us. And as Jim Rook pulls out a piece of wood, Boz says, You gotta be kidding, Nightmaster. That junk ain't gonna hold back the warlocks for long. Them bad guys can destroy whole worlds. And a defeated Jim Rook leans against the wall and puts his head against his arm and he says, Christ, I guess all we can do now is hope the traveler managed to find the elemental he went looking for in the swamps. Even if the others hadn't crapped in their pants, we wouldn't stand a chance out there without him. And Boz stands up and says, Nightmaster? And then without answering, Jim Rook moves back in front of the Oblivion Ink doorway and his flaming sword begins burning bright and he says, Quiet, Boz. The sword's humming. The warlocks must be getting closer to Earth. Get out of here and go find someplace safe to hide. Let me deal with this. And Boz replies, I ain't going no place, sir. There ain't no way I'd let you down and scram like the others. I'm going to stay by your side right till the end. And as Jim Rook stares at the doorway, he says, I know, Boz. You're a good pal. Now take a deep breath and stand your ground. Here they come. And then a bright white light begins to form in the doorway of the Oblivion Ink store. And then we cut back to Swamp Thing in the swamps, and he is looking at that button again from Abby's jacket, and he's thinking to himself, this world is damned if I dance to their tune and take part in the next ritual they have prepared for me, and damned if I do nothing. And then he closes his hand over the button tightly, and then he throws it as hard as he can into the water, and as he stares at where it landed, he thinks, what am I going to do? And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains&comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.